In this video, we'll be taking a look at 4 college basketball games happening on February 4th, 2026, and providing you with free team picks and total picks for each one of those games, so 8 picks in total. Welcome back to Cash Out Sports. Let's dive right into it. Oh, and don't forget to subscribe and to click the bell icon to get notified as soon as these videos get released so that you have more time to plan out your bets as we provide these videos on a daily basis. I can guarantee that you'll have all the important information that you'll need on these 4 college basketball games after fully watching this video. One more thing before we start, if you would like to gain access to our best exclusive sports picks to take your journey to the next level, then check out our Patreon in the link down below, where we offer our best single picks, parlay picks, and much more. Now let's get started. Northwestern versus Illinois. When you pull up this matchup and see Illinois sitting at home with a shiny number next to their name and Northwestern walking in as the team everybody expects to get handled, it feels like the script is already written. On paper, it really does look that simple. Illinois rolls in at 19-3 overall and 10-1 in the Big Ten, playing this one at State Farm Center in front of a crowd that basically treats big conference nights like a festival. They are on a long winning streak, stacking double-digit victories on teams like Purdue, Washington, and Nebraska, and the offense has that video game feel, dropping around 84.5 points per night and grading out as the most efficient attack in the country on the big analytics sites like KenPom and Bart Torvik. Northwestern, by contrast, shows up with a record in the 10-12 range and 2-9 in league play, fresh off a home loss to Washington where they got knocked around in the paint and looked a bit small around the rim. Oddsmakers saw all that and basically shrugged, hanging a huge number that says Illinois should cruise while Northwestern just tries to keep this thing respectable. The funny part is that once you get past the highlight reels and the rankings, the way these two actually play gives the underdog a little more room to breathe than you would think. Illinois scores a ton, but they do it without racing up and down for 40 minutes. Their tempo sits on the slower side of the national charts, down in that 250th range by pace metrics, and they lean heavily on ruthless efficiency, offensive rebounding near the top of the country, and constant trips to the free throw line more than sheer shot volume. Fewer possessions quietly help the team getting all those points because every empty trip from the favorite makes that big spread feel just a tiny bit higher. Northwestern, for all the flaws people love to point out, also prefers a half-court game built on ball movement instead of chaos. Previews keep circling the same themes for them, talking about rebounding discipline, sharing the ball, and keeping composure late in games, and that is basically code for wanting to drag this thing into a series of slow little negotiations instead of a track meet. Now fold in the bodies actually on the floor. Illinois is still missing starting guard Kylan Boswell, who fractured his right hand and is sidelined into February, and reserve big man Jason Jack Stice is gone for the season because of a blood clot, so the rotation is a bit thinner than the record suggests. In a game where everybody expects a blowout, a little foul trouble or a cold stretch from deep can snowball quickly when the bench is shorter. On the other side, Northwestern has its featured scorer fully back in rhythm. Nick Martinelli shook off a December concussion and has been on a tear, sitting in that 23 to 24 point per game pocket and landing among the top scorers in the country while casually dropping nights like 34 against Penn State. A player like that becomes a pressure valve in a tough road environment because one tough isolation bucket or a deep three at the right time can completely flip the mood in the building. He is not working alone either. Junior guard Jaden Reed gives them a steady second creator, sitting in double figures in scoring while handing out around 5.5 assists, and he clearly looks healthy and trusted with the ball. Give a team that kind of 1-2 punch, spot them a spread worth more than 2 touchdowns, and they suddenly do not need some miracle to stay in range. They just need to hit a few shots in the loud moments and avoid a full meltdown. There is also the comfort of already having seen this movie once. Illinois did go into Evanston and win the first meeting 79-68, but that final margin slid underneath the bigger number sitting on this rematch, and Northwestern did not exactly look terrified for most of that game. Now the venue flips, the crowd is louder, and the favorite has all the pressure while the Wildcats show up with basically nothing to lose and all the freedom to fire. Illinois is coming off emotional, high-profile games like that Nebraska showdown, and spots like that can quietly knock a bit of edge off even very good teams. Put it all together and you get a matchup where the favorite is clearly better, but the style, the current health, the rhythm of Northwestern's main guys, and the size of that spread all lean toward the scrappy visitor hanging around long enough to make every late possession feel uncomfortable for anyone holding a ticket on a blowout. As our first pick for this matchup, the Northwestern Wildcats to cover the spread as underdogs is our full game side pick. At first glance, it is easy to think this thing should turn into a shootout. Illinois has been labeled a historically strong offense for a reason, piling up those 80-plus points per game, shooting with an effective field goal rate in the mid-50s, and hammering the glass so well that they rank in the top handful of teams in offensive rebounding. Northwestern's profile, on the surface, looks like a perfect dance partner for a high-scoring night, sitting in the mid-70s in points scored and the low 70s in points allowed, with advanced stats that like their scoring efficiency but call out problems on the boards and a lack of turnovers forced. If you stop there, the picture looks like plenty of made shots, loose possessions, and a final score that ends up way past a typical college total. Here is the thing, though. The way these two are set up right now, and the way they want this specific game to feel, tug that story in the other direction. Illinois without Boswell has leaned into that jumbo style, rolling out wings and bigs in lineups that look like they are built to wear you down possession by possession. They are comfortable walking the ball over half court, running you through set after set, and trusting their size advantage, shooting and offensive rebounding to slowly bleed a game dry. That does not mean they cannot score, obviously. It just means they do it in a more methodical way that trims 2 or 3 possessions off each half. For Northwestern, the only realistic way to be there late is to lean into that slower rhythm rather than trying to match fire with fire in transition. They need to value the ball, keep turnover numbers under control, and force Illinois to defend for most of the shot clock instead of giving up quick runouts. Their own internal keys talk about rebounding, ball movement, and composure, and all 3 of those ideas point directly toward a game that breathes a bit heavier, with more half-court possessions and fewer loose, up-and-down stretches. Coaches talk about this all the time in pressers, where they insist on controlling tempo, and this is one of those matchups where both sides actually have reasons to avoid letting the pace spiral. Scorelines from recent Northwestern games against stronger opponents quietly support that picture. Look at the way things finished against Nebraska at 77-58, or the trip to USC at 74-68, or the visit to UCLA at 71-64, or even that home game against Washington that ended 76-62. None of those games turned into the kind of track meet that blows totals into the 160s. They settled in the mid-130s or low 140s, where a single slow stretch or a few empty trips on both sides can keep the final combined score well under a high bar. Even the first meeting between Illinois and Northwestern fits that mold. 79-68 gives you a combined 147, and that came with Illinois scoring that 79 on the road while Northwestern still found close to 70. Season numbers on the defensive side add more weight. Illinois allows around 68.2 points per game. Northwestern gives up roughly 72, and if you simply stack those together, you end up hovering around 140 as a basic expectation. That rough math lands below a lofty total, and that is before you factor in tempo. Both teams play at a pace tucked into the bottom half of Division I, which again clips a handful of possessions compared with the true run-and-gun programs. Personnel details matter here as well, not so much for who wins, but for how the game flows. Key scorers are available for both sides, which means the offenses have their best creators, but the injury list still nudges things toward a tighter, more controlled rotation. Freshman guard Keaton Wagler is active and leading Illinois in scoring and assists, steering the ball on a lot of possessions. Big men Tomislav and Zvonimir Ivizic anchor those larger lineups, giving Illinois size and length that translate more into paint touches and offensive rebounds than into a whirlwind pace. Northwestern's main rotation with Martinelli and Reed is on the floor and logging big minutes, while depth pieces like Cade Bennerman and Blake Smith are out indefinitely, trimming the bench a bit. For Illinois, Boswell, Jackstice, and Rogers are all sidelined, and Andrei Stojakovic has dealt with his own issues, which also pushes the staff toward a shorter group and a more deliberate approach. Put all of that together and a clear picture starts to form. You still get bursts of brilliant offense from Illinois. You still get shot making from Northwestern that keeps the scoreboard moving, but the overall rhythm feels more like a game that lives in the 140s than one that explodes past a higher mark in regulation. It is the kind of matchup where every rebound, every late clock possession, and every small scoring drought matter for the total, and where the slightly slower, more physical style becomes the quiet story behind the final combined number. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. BYU versus Oklahoma State. Gallagher-Iba Arena is about to feel like a pressure cooker, the kind of Big 12 night where the noise never really lets you breathe. The floor is tight, the fans are right on top of you, and little swings can feel huge, especially for a visiting team that wants to play its own style instead of getting dragged into someone else's mood. BYU walks into that setting with the profile of a team that has earned every bit of its ranking, sitting at 17-4 overall and 5-3 in league play, with a comfortable scoring margin that speaks louder than any single box score. The offense leans into spacing, shooting, and smart movement, not just trading tough twos and hoping they fall. They push the ball enough to keep defenses on their heels, but they do it with structure, like a team that knows exactly where the next pass should go instead of just sprinting and improvising on every trip. That combination of rhythm and control tends to travel pretty well, even when the background noise is all orange and very, very loud. Oklahoma State brings a very different kind of energy to the table, and honestly, that is what makes this matchup so fun. The Cowboys sit at 15-6 and 3-5 in conference play, and they have turned Gallagher-Iba into a real comfort zone again with a strong home record that includes only a couple of slips in their own building. They play fast, they pressure the ball, they dig into passing lanes, and they are not afraid of a little chaos if it means extra possessions and a crowd that gets to live on quick swings. The scoring is up there with the best in the league, but the defensive profile wobbles more, which sometimes turns their games into wild rides instead of smooth cruises. Here is the thing, the very chaos Oklahoma State tries to create can actually feed what BYU already wants to do. A team that shoots confidently, spreads the floor, and trusts its reads usually does not mind extra trips up and down the court, as long as those trips end with clean looks instead of rushed prayers. BYU's balance on both ends, paired with that reliable scoring margin, tilts this more toward a steady, methodical push than a coin flip that hinges on a single late possession. Over 40 minutes, the more measured side often finds the separation it needs, especially when it can punish defensive lapses with quick threes or sharp cuts rather than settling for crowded mid-range attempts. As our first pick for this matchup, the BYU Cougars to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. When two teams that already live comfortably in the 80s share the same floor, you are not exactly expecting a rock fight. BYU is used to putting pressure on the scoreboard from the opening tip, stacking efficient possessions instead of grinding long, slow sets on every trip. Oklahoma State loves to run, pushes pace with a deep bench, and leans into aggressive defense that can either create turnovers or simply give up quick looks if the rotation is a half step late. The shot profiles match that story. BYU is comfortable firing from the perimeter, and a team that can hit a steady stream of threes tends to turn an ordinary tempo into something that feels turbocharged once it finds a rhythm. Oklahoma State, on the other side, attacks the rim and the arc with confidence, so misses often turn into long rebounds, which then flip right into transition chances the other way. Those are the plays that stretch a game open, where both teams start trading runs and you glance at the scoreboard and realize you are already deeper into the total than you thought. Let me explain why that matters. When both sides are built more for scoring punches than slow, grinding stops, it becomes harder for the game to settle into a low possession crawl. Traps, presses, and quick threes may look risky, but they also speed things up, and neither of these offenses exactly shies away from that kind of tempo. Even if there is a cold stretch here or there, the overall rhythm still leans toward more shots, more runs, and more chances for both score columns to stay busy all night. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. Clemson versus Stanford. Clemson heading out to Maples Pavilion has that classic late-night college hoops feel, the kind that keeps bettors up while everyone else is asleep. A team that sits at 18-4 overall and 8-1 in league play does not travel west just to get a sweat in. It travels with a very clear identity and expectation. The numbers have treated Clemson kindly, slating them in that national top 25 range for overall efficiency, and what really jumps off the page is how stingy they are on the defensive side. Allowing about 64.5 points a night while still playing high major competition speaks to a group that actually takes pride in getting stops, not just scoring and shrugging. Stanford, sitting at 14-8 with a 3-6 conference mark, is more of a mood swing team, fun and dangerous but not always reliable. They put up roughly 76 points per game and give up around 73, which already tells you a little story about how their nights go. The efficiency models have them floating closer to the 80th range in the country, respectable but living in a different neighborhood than Clemson. It feels like that friend who is always in the game, always around the action, but not always the one holding the controller at the end. Styles make fights, and here the contrast is pretty sharp. Clemson prefers to live in the slow lane, logging around 64 possessions per game, which lands them in the bottom 10% nationally in tempo. That slower rhythm is not laziness, it is control, and it pairs with a defense that holds opponents near 40% shooting from the field and below 30% from deep. They sit in that top 15 tier in adjusted defensive efficiency and in the top 10 for fewest points allowed per game, and that combination is like trying to play a fence in a phone booth. Shot quality tilts their way too, with opponents held to an effective field goal clip around 46%, and that is where games quietly tilt in their favor. Stanford pushes a bit more, wants more possessions, and leans into the three ball, knocking down somewhere in that 8 to 9 threes per contest range. That style can get a building buzzing, especially at home, but it comes with a trade-off on the other end. Their defense allows an effective field goal percentage north of 51% and more than 73 points per game, which means they invite opponents into some pretty comfortable looks. Their own offense, while capable, sits closer to the national middle in terms of efficiency and has real trouble finishing consistently inside the arc. Against a defense that closes space and contests both the rim and the three-point line, that is like trying to thread a needle while someone shakes the table. From a betting standpoint, Clemson has been the kind of road team that makes spreads look too small. They have covered in 7 of 8 true road games and sit around 14 to 8 against the number overall, which tells you the market has been a step slow catching up. Stanford, on the other hand, has been more of a coin flip story, roughly 11 to 11 against the spread and underwater at home, which can be frustrating if you have tried to ride them. The line here reflects Clemson as a short favorite, roughly in that 2-possession pocket, essentially giving Stanford respect for home court and the long travel tax on the Tigers. Yet the efficiency gap hints at something wider, with Clemson's net rating hovering near plus 21 points per 100 possessions and Stanford closer to plus 10. Even after you hand Stanford a fair home court bump, the underlying math leans further toward the visitors than what the spread suggests. Roster-wise, Clemson's main rotation shows up intact. The notable absence is freshman guard Zach Foster, who is listed on the roster but ruled out for the season with a knee injury, so the group on the floor is the same one that built this profile. Stanford's depth chart brings some uncertainty, with forwards Chisam Okpara, Talis Tor, and Krister Skrinda all sitting on the injury report as questionable. Those tags can move closer to tip, but as listed they leave at least a little cloud over the Cardinals' front court options and bench stability. That combination of a healthier core for Clemson, a clearer pecking order, and a defense that already travels well makes the favorite feel more stable in a game where stability might matter more than flair. You get a likely script where Clemson slows things down, owns more of the shot quality, and makes Stanford hit a lot of tough, half-court looks to stay connected. Stanford is punchy enough to keep this interesting and can get hot in spurts, so it is not some free roll. But when the better and more balanced team is asked to cover only a short number despite a double-digit efficiency edge, the lean keeps circling back to one side. As our first pick for this matchup, the Clemson Tigers to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. On the surface, both teams live in that mid-70s range, with Clemson at about 76.5 per game and Stanford right around 76 as well. It sounds friendly for points until you remember how those totals are built. Clemson gets there by being very efficient across fewer trips, not by playing fast, while Stanford chases more possessions, more threes, and more swings in momentum. The key question becomes whether Stanford can still look like its usual scoring self against a defense that immediately drags the game into the mud. Clemson's defensive profile pushes this toward a more modest scoring environment. They hold opponents to around 64.5 points a night, keep field goal percentage under 40%, and limit opponents to just over 29% shooting from beyond the arc. Those are not just good numbers, they are rhythm killers, the kind that make a team feel like every clean look is a rare gift. Stanford's offense, while capable of those 75 to 76-point nights, sits with an effective field goal percentage below 50% and a two-point percentage in the high 40s. That combination does not scream we light up elite defenses, especially against a group that is comfortable defending both the paint and the perimeter. Totals bettors get extra clues from how these teams have treated the number across the season. Both have gone under more often than not, sitting at 9 overs against 13 unders each. For a team with Stanford's reputation as more attack-minded, seeing more unders at Maples Pavilion hints at how often games can slow into half-court battles instead of full-throttle track meets. Clemson takes that even further with its top-tier defense and bottom-tier pace. Once they grab control of a game, second halves can start to look like long, deliberate possessions, extended defensive stands, and scores that creep rather than explode. Context adds a little more texture. A late tip on the West Coast for a team traveling from the Eastern time zone can sometimes sap a bit of shooting rhythm, even if these are still young legs and big-stage competitors. Maples can get loud, but it is not always a place where games turn into wild scoring festivals, especially when one side is trying to squeeze every possession. Stanford will still get its chances to push and to fire from deep, but every contested jumper and every late clock possession feeds into a script that favors a more controlled scoreboard. So instead of expecting both teams to push into the 80s, it becomes easier to picture long stretches where one team is stuck in the 50s or low 60s, and the other has to grind its way just a bit higher. It is only a projection, nothing more, but when you connect the slower tempo, the defensive efficiency edge, the season-long undertrend for both squads, and the travel and time factors, the total leans toward a quieter night on the scoreboard rather than a fireworks show. As our second pick for this matchup, under the projected total is our full game total pick. Utah State versus New Mexico. This matchup feels like a Mountain West spotlight game, with Utah State walking into the pit and basically stepping into a pressure cooker that has teeth. Both teams roll in with strong resumes, Utah State sitting around an 18-3 type season and New Mexico hovering near 18-4, each roughly 9-2 in league play. So this is not some random midweek game. It is a meeting between two contenders staring at each other across the top of the standings. Oddsmakers have signaled how tight this is by hanging only a small number for the home side, which quietly tells you the market sees these teams as very close on a neutral floor and that the environment in Albuquerque is a big part of the equation. The pit itself almost has a personality. The building is dug into the ground. The sound hangs in the air. More than 15,000 people feel like they are on top of the floor. And that noise does not just make highlights. It wears on ball handlers and decision-making over 40 minutes. New Mexico has turned that into a real weapon, stringing together a long home winning streak that stretches back close to 2 full seasons and pairing it with the kind of scoring margin that makes you double-check the box score, routinely winning by double digits while living in the low 80s on offense and holding opponents somewhere in the high 60s. That mix of comfort, confidence, and constant pressure in their own building is not just narrative. You can see it in how often their games at home tilt their way late when most teams start to feel the walls closing in. Utah State does not exactly walk in as a soft touch either, which is what makes this line feel so small and so interesting. On paper, their offense looks like a clinic. They score in the low 80s as well, shoot at a clip that lives just over the 50% mark from the floor, and consistently rank among the more efficient attacks in the country. Their style is almost surgical, lots of good spacing, smart movement, and a willingness to work for clean looks instead of just hoisting something early in the clock, the kind of approach that absolutely punishes weak or lazy defenses. The catch is that this version of Utah State has been a lot less friendly to bettors than their pretty efficiency numbers suggest, especially when they leave Logan with an against the spread record around 9-11 and a rough recent history in this specific building, just one cover in their last 8 trips to Albuquerque. That kind of trend is not everything, but when it lines up with what your eyes tell you, that they can get nudged off rhythm by a hostile building and by a defense that is better than casual fans give it credit for, it starts to feel less like noise and more like a real pattern. New Mexico's defense may not be the first thing people mention, yet it grades out as one of the sturdier units in the league, living somewhere around the top 50 nationally in points allowed and around the top 30 in advanced adjusted defensive metrics, which pairs nicely with a pit identity built on swarming pressure and waves of shooters on the other end. In a matchup where the number is short, where one late turnover or one late whistle can flip the cover, the side that has not dropped a home game in a long time is sitting slightly in the black against the spread near 12-9 and thrives on the chaos that this particular arena creates starts to look more trustworthy when the game gets into that frantic final 2 minutes. As our first pick for this matchup, the New Mexico Lobos to cover the spread as favorites is our full game side pick. This game practically advertises points just based on how these two offenses carry themselves over a full season. Utah State comes in averaging in the low 80s with a very healthy efficiency margin, while New Mexico sits just a tick behind in raw scoring at a little over 80 per night with a scoring margin in the low teens that shows they are not simply trading buckets, they are building real separation. That combination, two teams that can both fill it up and are not interested in crawling through possessions, is exactly the recipe that nudges totals into the higher ranges before you even talk through the finer details. The underlying tempo numbers support that feeling. New Mexico playing at a pace that sits comfortably in the upper portion of the national rankings. Utah State more middle of the road in raw speed, but so efficient that their trips down the floor almost play like fast breaks on the scoreboard. It is not really a grinded-out matchup. It is more like two well-run offenses playing chess at high speed, and that visual lines up with how their games look over the course of a month. New Mexico under this current staff has leaned hard into modern spacing and confidence from deep, and the results show up clearly. They have had multiple games with 10 or more made threes, which is not just a hot night here or there, it is part of their identity. And as the calendar turned, they found a groove from outside, shooting north of 40% from three over that recent stretch that put them inside the top tier nationally in long-range accuracy. That style, when paired with a loud home building, tends to create runs that balloon scores in a hurry. One or two turnovers, a quick outlet, a kick-out three, and suddenly what felt like a normal game is sitting 10 points higher than you realized. Their recent totals reflect that, with a healthy share of overs both overall and especially at home. Something like 4 of the last 5 overall and 8 of the last 12 in their own building getting past the projected number. That is not a promise that it happens again, but it is a pretty loud hint that when this team finds its rhythm, the scoreboard stops resting. Utah State brings a slightly different flavor, but the same end result, which is a lot of points on the board. Their offense lives on clean looks, cutting, and patience that still somehow feels aggressive, and they knock down shots at over 50% from the floor and somewhere past 36% from deep. Those numbers translate into one of the better offensive ratings in the country, and when you watch them for a few games, you see why totals involving them have gone over in something like 8 of their last 12 contests. Even when the pace is not blazing, their ability to score efficiently on so many trips makes it very hard for a game to stay low scoring because empty possessions are rare and mini spurts are common. When you put that style on the same floor as New Mexico's free-flowing, perimeter-heavy attack, you get a matchup where long, quiet stretches feel unlikely and long scoring stretches feel almost inevitable. The context around this particular meeting quietly nudges things toward more points as well. First place in the conference is in play. The building will be packed and extremely loud, and big stakes often pull coaches toward shorter leashes and more aggressive decisions, especially with timeout usage and rotation choices, which can favor offense when the main scorers stay on the floor a bit longer. In a game where the teams are fairly evenly matched, you also tend to get more of the classic late-game sequence, strategic fouling, extra free throws, quick possessions, and maybe even a last-second shot that only matters to people holding tickets on the total. Their recent history together supports that bigger picture, with several of the last handful of meetings landing in ranges where both teams found their way into the 60s or beyond, which fits neatly with how these current versions are built. Put all of that together, the offensive profiles, the recent trends, the emotional stakes, and the way these styles interact, and it is hard not to picture a scoreboard that stays busy from tip to final horn. As our second pick for this matchup, over the projected total is our full game total pick. That's all for now, so if you have any other games you would like reviewed, then leave a comment down below with the game you would like analyzed, subscribe to our channel, leave a like on this video, and we'll get to it as soon as we possibly can. We would also love to hear your opinion on the picks presented to you in this video, whether you agree or disagree with them, so leave a comment down below and do let us know.